In this segment, staying on the topic of people-centered design of public streets and places, we're going to up the ante by talking about features that can really bring a place to life. To do this, I'm going to emphasize the economic demands on public space. And while I'll offer a mix of illustrations, I'm going to use a lot of examples from Melbourne in Australia. And that's because it's such a smart culture of exploiting public space to get the most out of it. It makes a great case study. This goes one step further from simple, spontaneous social interaction to a much more active hosting and facilitating of engagement and transaction in public spaces. By carefully considering design quality and value and utility in a tailored way, as has happened in this Melbourne Square, you can significantly push up the quotient of vibrancy of those spaces, which is in many places an essential economic development strategy for a smart city, as well as just making those cities more livable and usable. This flower stall in Montreal really illustrates the point. As transaction occurs, a scene of activity and energy among lots of people is literally fixed in the setting. This more modest example of a movable cafe in a boulevard in Aspen, Colorado illustrates that this can be done at any scale, in big cities for sure, but also in smaller towns. A key consideration is the relationship between the public and the private, the interface condition. There needs to be a strong symbiosis between what is happening on both sides of that interface line. This typical retail street in Melbourne offers a very good illustration. On the one hand, the continuity and diversity of individual shops located proud to the sidewalk is essential on the private side. And then a range of movement and public use conditions stretch along that sidewalk and street on the public side, including slowed down traffic, good transit, and space for cyclists. Also, trees on the public side enhance the appeal of the private shopping experience, and together they give us a great street that's rich in human activities and transactions of all kinds. Here's another good example in Santa Barbara, California, that does the same thing, but in a totally different way. Also, in the public realm, there are great benefits to fostering different users and uses at different times as public demands vary. For some hours of the day, this Istanbul street is a traffic corridor. But in other hours each day, it turns into a market that brings the whole area around it alive. Or what about this flower stall, this time in London, that pops up once a day? I like this come-and-go sidewalk seating in Dallas that's set up and dismantled with the seasons. Here also in Dallas, a parking lot turns into a flea market about once a week. Sadly, this kind of diversity of features and change of use is often illegal because the law has become so fixed on the simple matters of movement and utility. But people are not, so the laws need to change to reflect the endless complexity of human energy. And you can take this even further, making it more deliberate by fixtures and fittings and furniture that finishes a space with the infrastructure that well accommodates specific preferred activities, such as this stage, which is set up in one of the main squares in Melbourne, or this whole space, which is furnished as a public market in one of the neighborhoods of this same city. Melbourne added a glass elevator to this set of three-dimensional spaces and therefore transformed their utility and their draw and their interest. Often it's just a matter of adding bathrooms. Melbourne does this in a very artful way, as you see here. Sometimes just addition of a bench or a little clever pavement will create a place from what was basically nothing. These cupboards in a Madrid park create an instant book market on a daily basis that can be gone in an instant. In the modern world, we're finding that people can work almost anywhere. In fact, they work almost everywhere. A smart city will create the settings in their public spaces to facilitate that work, the furnishings, and even pervasive Wi-Fi. A most important understanding is that activities can be connected in a network by utilizing spaces in a city that are sometimes forgotten. The activation of the lanes in Melbourne is amazing, both for general activities and, as you see here, for commerce. Related to this is that you need a range of sizes of spaces in your community because different uses have different scales and different needs. Not just big parks, but more intimate spots where you can just stop for a moment to catch your breath, as this gentleman is doing in Melbourne. Why, Bill? Because you can. Also, we have to be careful not to let some standard specification edit out the natural transactions that can happen on a successful sidewalk. This bicycle rental spot would die if an aggressive sidewalk clearance width was rigidly applied. Or something that we often forget to do in modern cities, which is take advantage of leftover and ad hoc spaces for positive activities. In Melbourne, they just add a few benches or a table and chairs, and the space is rediscovered. I like this little meeting place that has been tucked within the Nishantasi neighborhood in Istanbul. But to really make strides on a people-centered strategy for the public realm of your city, there is one more factor that overlays everything that I've been talking about, and that is the benefit of beauty in public spaces. Our Melbourne case study offers so many good examples. People respond to beauty and character and uniqueness. Design attention draws people. Artfulness fulfills them at a very personal level, and it energizes them to interact and engage with one another. Even a small art statement can become a magnet. Color changes the dull to the vibrant, and we never use enough of it in our cities. And design details can have stunning results. Look at this very cool seating. Or these simple steps in a park that kids just, well, they can't ignore it. Beautiful landscape is always memorable. Leaving Melbourne, this art installation in Vancouver took a dead space and made it a special destination. And don't forget music. Buskers are a very good thing in public spaces, like these singers in a Moscow park. This foreshore in Sydney has converted simple concrete into commercial success through very suave design. Or let's go back to Paris. A special flair and style can resolve many other difficulties that inflict our public areas, especially our streets. A major lesson is offered by the famous street, the Champs-Élysées in Paris, acknowledged as one of the most beautiful places in the world. This is a preeminent people place with powerful energy, even though the street is too wide and the traffic is loud and frenetic and dirty. But it works for people by the thousands every day simply because it is so beautiful. The point is, as we have said so many times before, that good design matters, and fine design of public places can pay big dividends. To close, let me turn away from Melbourne and offer several final, vivid examples to show how people-centered design can absolutely redefine public spaces and refresh the image of a city, how you can rediscover overlooked spaces and engender powerful energy for both public, social, and economic benefits. The examples I want to close with are from a very proactive program in New York City. The first example is the reclamation of pedestrian space along Broadway at Times Square in Manhattan. Here are the before and then after pictures of the redesign, which was initially done with just paint and signs and inexpensive furniture. It was very quickly put in place. The other example is the same scenario further along Broadway at Herald Square. Again, here are the before and then the after pictures of this transformation. With the successful temporary retrofit, a more fulsome permanent scheme is being put in place in both of these locations. For these initiatives, the city first found spaces that could reasonably be removed from the primary traffic footprint. And then they protected those spaces. And then they embellished the spaces, first temporarily and then permanently, and then they are populated in a way that really has changed everything around them for the better. In our next segment, Jonathan will look at the specific circumstances of streets. Streets not only take up most public land in a city, but from a people-centered perspective, They've been the subject of some very retrogressive design practices and standards over the last few generations because the needs of the car really took precedence over everything else. Often they are pretty hostile places for everyone except those people in the cars. Jonathan will show how a street can be reconceived with a people-centered design attitude and a philosophy that streets must serve many functions. He'll talk about what we call complete streets.